October version of the Parks and Rec Committee meeting. Maybe we could stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance. Great, thank you. First of all, I'd like to take a minute and welcome our newest member, Bill Quinn, to the board. Glad to have you here. Glad to fill the seat after 10 months, I guess, here. October is the 10th month of the year, so welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Forward to having you here. Okay, I believe all of you received your minutes from the September meeting, and hopefully you've had a chance to review them. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
I'll make a motion. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Tammy, I thought maybe we've got a presentation this evening on the Darby Paley Trail Design Plan review. Maybe we do that first, just so, and I didn't get a chance to meet the young lady who's here to make this presentation, but that way maybe she won't have to sit through everything else we have to do tonight, although you're certainly welcome to stay. But if you're happy to go first, I'll let you go first, and then if you'd like to head out, you're certainly welcome to do that too. Thank you.
And I brought a presentation, and I can keep it as short or go into as much detail as the board likes. So,
Well, I think for this board's purpose right now, I think we're probably just looking for an executive version of
overview.
what it's about,
Sure.
where you are in the process, and what kind of the next steps are. My understanding is we still have to find the money to pay for all this.
Yes, and I'll
So,
talk about that.
if you could add a little bit on that, but, you know, if you've got 10 to 15 minutes, that'd be great.
Perfect. Okay.
Thank you.
And I'm Michelle Adams from Meliora Design, so thank you for having us here tonight.
Thank you, Michelle.
And I also have on here the Harford Park Trail, if you, I don't know if you want to talk about what that is at all, the Harford Trail. It's not a park, it's just the slides are on here.
We can just keep it to the Darby Paoli Trail. That was what we had advertised at this point,
Okay.
that what would be discussed this month.
They're the same slides that were shared with the commissioners in August, so. All right. So just an overview, you probably recognize this diagram from Natural Lands that shows the main trail of the Darby Paoli Trail coming from the Willows through the Skunk Hollow area and down here to Sawmill Fields. It's about a 1 mile paved multi-use trail running largely along Darby Paoli, but also coming off of it, with several miles of soft trails in these various loops, the Rye Field, the Quarry Field, etc. There are 2 bridges, one in Skunk Hollow area and one over here in the Sawmill Park area. And it's also being coordinated with the Skunk Hollow sewer replacement project in the Skunk Hollow crossing area because there's an emergency sewer repair happening in that area. Will be a small parking lot over here by near the barn, and Steve Norsini has also asked us to look at potentially putting a small parking lot over here across the street from the Sawmill Park with a crossing.
Michelle, that parking lot by the barn, is that a pull-in parking lot where
Yes.
people would have to back onto Darby Paoli Road to leave that parking lot?
No, it's a full parking lot where they pull in and turn around and come back out.
Thank you.
Yes. No. Okay. So, where we are right now, what's been completed is the topographic survey's been completed, the wetlands delineation, the preliminary layout with line and grade, and an initial design and looking at ADA considerations for that area. We've altered the layout as it was originally shown by NL because of topography. So there's some minor variations, but generally it follows the original intent of NL's design. A couple of design decisions have been made. In September there was a meeting with Public Works and the decision was made that the bridges should be designed to carry the Public Works vehicles so they have access to the trail. As I mentioned, work's being done in coordination with the Skunk Hollow sewer repair because that emergency sewer repair cleared a swath of trees through that area and disturbed the stream. And as I mentioned, there's a potential additional parking lot on Sawmill Road. And I'll touch on the Ryefield crossing because there are some concerns with being able to cross Paoli Darby Road to get to the Ryefield Loop because of that intersection. So I can share some photos of that. Next steps, this is the picture of the sewer as it's been put in, the temporary sewer, and you can see how a path was cut through that area for the sewer line, so that disturbance has occurred. Next steps, shortly they'll be doing the geotechnical borings at Skunk Hollow for the bridges and also for the sewer, and it's a nice overlay of we need the geotechnical testing for the sewer, so it'll also meet the needs of the bridge for the trail. We're working right now on refining the grading and doing the conceptual stormwater management. Following that, the trail will be staked and we will walk it with the arborist to look at the trees that may be impacted to see if anything needs to be adjusted. Then there'll be resident meetings and an open walk, and we'll have discussions with the shade tree and the Radnor Conservancy and develop a detailed construction estimate for construction. The goal is to apply for construction funding in 2019, and I have a slide on potential funding sources. Then I have several slides if you'd like me to walk through the sections of the trail. Is that helpful, or is this okay? So starting up at the Willows, you can see down here, this was the original. So this is the parking lot in the Willows, if you're familiar with the parking lot. And the original intent was to come off the corner of the parking lot, to come off the parking lot around the back of it and loop like this. Because of grading and because of wetlands in this area, we're now bringing the trail from this corner of the parking lot rather than that corner of the parking lot. And a loop trail will go over to the corner here to crossing at the Ryefield, and the main trail will continue down along the road. Show you the next slide. There's some images that show, so that's you can see the parking lot and the wetlands. So rather than coming off behind this photo, we're coming off at the corner of the parking lot and going from there up the hill. And when we get to the Ryefield and Darby Paoli Road, we've done line and grade, and so you can see in this area there's some real topography challenges. So that's the reasoning for adjusting the grade of the path. This is the intersection at Newtown, I believe it's Newtown Road, where the crossing to the Ryefield would potentially occur. McMahon, the traffic engineer, is studying this because we've obviously got visibility conditions, a lot of traffic. There's telephone poles that would be impacted, so we're in discussions with the township about the challenges of this crossing right here to the Ryefield because of the visibility conditions. Moving along from there into Skunk Hollow, this was, the red line was the original path shown through Skunk Hollow, coming around. This is, if you've been back in there, there's sort of not a parking lot, but a level area where people park cars. We're currently showing the path on the other side because it seemed to work better for grades and less disturbance. Where you see this loop splitting here was originally because there was initial determination of wetlands in this area, but that's no longer the case. They're not wetlands, so this will be a single trail through here. Let me show you some photos. Again, that's the sewer at the crossing. That's what the creek looks like downstream. This is coming in, looking back up at Darby Paoli Road, so you can see how we've got really steep embankments as we get close to Darby Paoli Road in this area. This was a challenge to figure out. And we talked about potentially improving that level area into a parking lot, but the access onto Darby Paoli Road from this driveway is not feasible for that. And this is also trafficked by the township vehicles going to the compost facility. So for that reason, this is not going to be a formal parking lot area. Then moving down to Sawmill Road into the fields, you can see the main trail comes along through here, and we have the riparian soft trail along the stream edge that loops around with the bridge crossing right here. And so that you can see that these are the more formalized drawings here on the left. This is what the intersection looks like at that area. Where the trail will be coming across. This is the bridge, and people currently park in this area right here. It's kind of gravelly behind the photo here. The township's trying to discourage that with a new parking lot on the other side of the bridge. That's looking at the field. So looking across to the other side to doing the parking, it's on the next slide. Here is the parking lot that is part of the hardscape formalized Darby Paoli Trail, and you can see it's actually a pull-in turnaround parking lot rather than just pulling over. There's the cows, and we need to coordinate the wetland, crossing this little stream and wetland with a culvert. Looking back up where the parking lot will be, and this is where the trail will go. And then there'll be a walking bridge in the sawmill area with potentially parking across the street, and then the bridge crossing the creek to the soft trail here. And parking potentially over in this area right here. So that's kind of an overview. That's what the creek looks like at Sawmill. There are some openings. That's the current pedestrian path to where the bridge potentially is being shown, which is right about there. And that's looking over across the street to what could be the parking area, the second parking area. So that's an overview of, and we have engineering drawings of the line and grade for the path, both the soft paths and the formal paved path, as well as some of the structures. They're at about a, I'd say about a 40% level at this point. We haven't taken them further until we have the borings from the structures. So that's an overview of the design. One other component is potential funding sources. These are some of the funding sources that are being considered. We have a design budget of nearly $500,000. It's about 35% spent at this point. And McMahon has put together a small scope of work. McMahon, the traffic engineers, sent to Steve Norsini today to help identify components of the trail that would fit into these different funding sources. And in that scope, they're suggesting breaking the trail into different segments, because you'll never get enough funding for everything all at once. So what parts of the trail are suitable for these different potential funding sources, and how should they break it apart? And that's pretty much the overview. Is there any other questions or anything anybody wants to discuss? Or
There we go. I have a question with respect to the cow pasture portion.
Yes.
In terms of distance from Darby Paoli Road to the trail, if there's any type of elevation change, buffering, protection of folks on the trail from a stray vehicle.
And this doesn't show it the whole way, but you can see that there is a buffer here, and that's being designed to meet PennDOT standards as well as McMahon's recommendations to move people away from the road itself in that portion of the trail. You can see there's a buffer there. I don't have a dimension on it, but there is a buffer. Yeah, thank you. And this is a soft trail over here. This part is just mowed. Okay. Any other questions?
The barn
Yeah.
is not in good condition. Is anything, you're not involved in anything with regard to the
We're not involved in
barn?
anything with the barn.
Right.
No, that's
Okay.
not in this.
And Tammy, am I correct that we still lease part of that land to a farmer, but once this trail starts to be built, that lease will go away, or what happens there?
I'm not aware of that lease going away. I
Oh,
think it
so-
stays the same, yeah.
So a
I'm not
farmer will
sure.
still be on his portion of land that he's leasing and still do what he's doing?
Yes, as far
Okay.
as I'm aware. And there might be some changes in dynamics, of course, in terms of how the cows are moved around,
But
but
won't, yeah, because I know cows are in that field by the barn, so. Okay.
I know the surveyor had trouble with the cows pulling the flagging off the wetland markings. So the cows were pulling the wetland flagging out before the surveyor could get there. That was a bit of a challenge. I mean,
I just have one question about the parking area,
yes.
because we did have neighbors, one of the neighbors that came here and was not convinced that that was the best place to put it, because he had stated at one of our meetings here, public meeting, that one of the reasons why he bought his house there was because he could look out and see parkland and trails and things. Have we addressed any of his issues, or are you?
We have not had any resident discussions
he-
yet or meetings.
Okay, but at what point will he be able to have that input? Because he came here before us.
Right.
And gave that input. So I think if you're going to take input after you have the design and after you have like everything, I mean, when will he have the opportunity to do that? And maybe it was moved, so because it looks as if it's not right
Chuck, I
across
think,
from his house
Chuck,
anymore.
I believe it already has been relocated
Yeah.
as a result of that.
That would be my question. It looks
Yeah.
as if it's not across from his house anymore.
Right. Yeah,
Is this
it used to
his
be shown on the other side of the barn.
Over here.
Okay.
It was over here before.
So that's been basically taken care of. Okay. That's
Yeah.
all.
And this also has good visibility for access to the parking lot. So, good. Thank you. Anything else?
Any other questions for Michelle? Okay, great. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you for having us.
All right, why don't we jump back into first portion of the meeting. Tammy, could you give us a quick report from your standpoint? Recreation
Sure.
Department?
I'll give an update just briefly on some of the programming highlights for September with school getting underway. Thank you, Michelle. With school getting underway, we have 2 after-school programs that are up and running at Ithan with over 60 kids, so we're excited about that. Junior soccer over at Clemacrone Park continues to be very popular. We have about 14 sessions with 150-plus kids, so a lot of soccer going on over there, and I'm sure a lot of enjoyment with the playground as well at Clemacrone. We also had a lot of pickleball getting underway at the rack, which I know we'll talk about in a little bit with the floor having to be replaced. It was over and above success that we could imagine. We have a weekday program. I know that, Chris, that you had been stepping up to lead for us, and we also had some daytime programming, evening programming, and I think a educational session going on too on the weekend. So those were all moving along really with great success, very popular. We also had the fall harvest event that just took place this past Sunday. We had thousands of people in attendance at the Willows. It was the 7th annual. It's hard to believe that it's 7 years already. The event featured a lot of really great new activities. We had a mechanical bull ride. We had a Velcro wall. We had the bounce houses, of course, back. And bless you. We also had the ponies and, of course, the pumpkin picking. That's always very popular, folks wrestling in the pumpkin patch to get their pumpkins early. We never can have enough pumpkins, of course, for folks, but we certainly try. So we're getting ready for a lot of events coming up too. Next weekend on the 19th on Friday, bless you again, we have upcoming a Girl Scout campfire and sing-along. This is the 2nd year we've been doing this event, so that'll be taking place. It's an event kind of designed to attract girls that are interested in Girl Scouts who want to come and learn more and potentially join, of course, the organization. We also have the Trick or Treat at the Township building that's coming up on Friday the 26th. Here throughout the building during the day. We get a lot of preschoolers that come in and little kids trick-or-treating for the first time. It creates a safe environment for them to come through the building and trick-or-treat during the daytime hours. We also have the Radnor Run. We're in our 41st year, amazingly, of the Radnor Run on October 28th. And then, of course, Santa's Delivery is going to be coming up. We'll have the gift drop-off day in the end of November on the 24th. And then we also have, to back up, our mother-daughter dance our mother-daughter tea party event is actually still open. I think we have about 20 more spots left. That was a new event that we started last year that sold out in a couple of days. We just opened registration actually on Tuesday, so there are a few spots left. Maybe it might be closed as we're speaking, but a very popular event that we did in partnership with Taste of Britain as well as the Saturday Club. So excited about those coming up. Lots of great things. In terms of projects, I think right now, with Emlyn Tunnel, I know we talked about it in September with the comfort station there. We also brought it before the Parks and before the Board of Commissioners. I think we're just in the process of getting approval from the school district at this point. I know Bob has been working with the superintendent, so we're waiting for approval there, and then we'll be bringing it back to the Board of Commissioners formally for approval to purchase the building, and then subsequent to that to approve the whole bid package that will go out with, I guess it would be actually construction at that point. So excited about that to get moving along, and fingers crossed that we can make something happen by spring. Still to be determined on the timeline. Warren Philippone and Beauconnor, I know we talked about the project for park improvements there extensively in July and then again in September. We're just awaiting the final bid package that'll go out, that'll be put out publicly. Again, another project hoping to get started really quickly in an effort to make improvements before the busy spring season. Another one that'll be, of course, a tight turnaround, but improvements coming. So we're excited about that. And then over the next couple months, I know we'll be taking a closer look at Fenimore Woods and the bathroom along the Radnor Trail before the Parks and Recreation Board. So those sit on the immediate horizon. We also have some repairs that are going to be planned for Radnor Activity Center with regards to the roof. These are some repairs that can be made more immediately versus a full replacement. As a matter of fact, what had been determined through some reports that had been generated based on roof evaluations, that the main membrane that goes over the main part of the gym, which covers the gym, essentially can be repaired relatively inexpensively. So those repairs are something that our township manager can quickly authorize and we can move ahead on. It'll include repairing some of the areas where the gravel has kind of come off the building where it's exposed, where the membrane is exposed, and those can be put back down with like a rubberized substance that will hold it in place. They can do it pretty quickly. There's some repairs around the flashings that go around the heating and air conditioning units. There's 4 of them that sit on top of the main part of the roof, and those can be made relatively inexpensively. So we're going to get moving on those repairs. And then we'll be evaluating the main replacement, which is the back portion of the roof relative to the 2019 budget, the capital budget. So that'll definitely be a priority item. I know we're going to talk about the budget here in a couple minutes. And then, of course, just to kind of dovetail, I guess, into our new business item, the rack floor, Radnor Activity Center floor, is going to need replaced. Unfortunately, this stems from the August 13th flooding that had come into the back portion of the facility and had come across the gym floor. Unfortunately, based on the reporting, we had another report that was actually done on behalf of the insurance adjuster with the school district that came in, that we received yesterday. And working with Michelle Deco at the business office, I know she was privy to the evaluation when it took place earlier this week on Tuesday, indicates that the roof is unsafe and unplayable. So in kind of reading this information and seeing this and talking with Michelle yesterday, the township manager and I actually visited the facility and went through it, and it looked very bad. There were a lot of areas where the floorboards meet. They've kind of cupped. I guess it's a terminology used in the roofing industry or the flooring industry, where they've split open. And there are very sharp edges that are exposed. So I would have significant concern if somebody were to go down on that floor or slide for a ball or, run and slide. These kinds of things happen all the time on gym floors, and it could definitely create a significant safety hazard. So we did close the facility down starting yesterday when we discovered this, and coupled with the report and the information. It's a lot to re-coordinate and move around, so I know the school district's been great in working with us. We're going to try to accommodate a lot of the usage as much as we can in and around the district. We're kind of eyeing in on the middle school, of course, to try to undertake a lot of the rentals, a lot of the scheduled programming that's going on as best as possible. Other things, unfortunately, have to be canceled, and we're working through that process at this point. Today, the contractor actually went over to start the process of evaluating the floor. They cut a hole in the floor to take a look at it more closely to see what the sub base looks like, to understand some of the dynamics. That way we can accurately put together a new floor plan and get it done as fast as possible. So it's not the news we wanted to have right now at any time, let alone as we're about to embark on Radnor Youth Basketball season, of course. And come December 1, that facility every weeknight and every weekend day is, around the clock. So I think there's a possibility we can get it reopened by December 1, and we're going to work as fast as we can through that process with the contractor, the insurance adjuster, of course, and the school district. I know they've been really supportive to the process and working with us.
So Tammy, let's just continue with this because it's important, obviously. what's going to happen to the roof repairs? As I understand it, there's two areas of the roof. There's the main roof, which I believe you said the report indicated that could be repaired, does not need to be replaced. And I'm not sure what the cost associated with that is, and I don't know if Bob needs approval from the Board of Commissioners to do that or not, or if he can do that.
The township manager, Bob, can do that.
He can do that. And
Yeah.
then the second question is, there's other roof areas that are over the back portion of the building, I believe the front portion of the building. I think you told me those areas, based on the couple of reports you've received, need to be replaced. But they're not over a floor where they could do damage to a floor. I guess my main point is, wouldn't we need to get the roof repaired before we put a new floor in?
We don't have to. So I've been working with the roofing company to see if there's, going to be any need to get in through the floor, you know what I mean, through the main entrance. It seems like everything they can bring in that they need is relatively simple. They can come in the back entrances and go right up the stairwells. The access to the roof is actually in an office that's upstairs on the back portion of the building, and they can easily access the roof and come across the roof. So the floor work can start to happen simultaneously with what would be going on in terms of the minor roof repairs to the main portion of the roof.
Yeah, I was thinking more of a big rain event coming after we replace the floor before we repair the roof. So it seems to me like 1 and 1A kind of thing.
The roof repairs, I'm just waiting for the company to give me a date to come in, which is going to be soon. And the repairs were, I believe, $5,800, so it was relatively inexpensive. So obviously
Okay.
something that would avoid us going
So
to the board.
that should be done before the floor gets.
Before that floor would ship, we're definitely going to have that
Good.
repair made, because
Thank
that'll
you.
be a long process.
And while we're interrupting you, Tammy, in terms of the flooring costs, do we anticipate that that's going to be covered by insurance? Have we not reached that stage yet? Hopefully, we have a replacement cost basis policy, which would open the door for that to happen. I don't know if you have any information on that topic.
Well, each of the reports that were done to evaluate the floor, and the school district had its own adjuster working on the process with the insurance company, who had their own flooring company that they had sent out. So back in August, I had our flooring company go out, because I just wanted to, get them out there, be proactive, and then they followed up after the floor had had a chance to hopefully air out, and, a little bit of ventilation going through the facility. We had the drying process take place. So there were quotes that were generated on what the estimated replacement would be. They were both relatively close, right in the same ballpark. I think there's a couple unknowns to the process that have to do with the amount of repair to the subbase, which has to do with boards that are under the subbase, as well as the concrete base that sits there, to make sure that that's level. And then at that point, once we kind of understand all those details, we would go back to the insurance company and verify, okay, will this cost be made? Because the township doesn't want to have a gap, or a shortfall that we have to cover. So I did have that conversation with Michelle when we spoke yesterday, and her feeling was that, whatever claim gets submitted, it's, this is what it is. It'll be, eligible for reimbursement at that point. I know when we went through this process back in 2015, the bills were paid directly through the insurance company, so that had occurred pretty swiftly when we had the floor resurfaced due to an insurance claim.
Any other questions for Tammy about about her report or about the rack and the floor issues? Okay. Thank you, Tammy. Let's just quickly go through other reports. John, do you have a report, Board of Commissioners?
Main issue is that we are in budget cycle. We set our meetings, and we're looking forward to getting information from you all to support that process.
Thank you, John. John, you had emailed me about conditions over at the Willows. Do you want to speak to that?
Well, I visited the Willows a couple times, and I was there for the Pumpkin Festival, and it seems to me that in general, the Willows Park is in a fairly degraded condition. A lot of different items. The park is slowly being reclaimed by the swamp, if you will. because that park is under-drained, and that under-draining is obviously failing. We have that big patch of fragmites across from the picnic area. So there's I'm going to try to get some money put in the budget this year for work at the Willows Park, separate from the mansion. And I would like your support in doing that.
Yeah, I've been through there a couple of times this week as well, just to follow up on the email I received from you, and I agree, it's slowly degrading and in need of work. Comes down to money, obviously. I'm not sure there's a lot we can do from our end, but if there's a recommendation, et cetera, that we can talk about, work on for our next meeting, we're certainly happy to do that, but it's hard to know that without getting a scope of work or something a little bit more detailed with regard to what are the, if there's a list of 20 things that need to be done in there, what are items 1 through 5?
Yeah, I hope to be able to put that together. And by the way, this is not a reflection on staff at all. This wet year has been brutal. There's large pieces, I'm sure you saw when you're out there, they can't even mow anymore. So anyway, it's kind of disappointing having, loved the Willows for 30 plus years and seeing what's happened.
Okay, thank you, John. Did anybody attend the Shade Tree meeting by chance?
Actually, I didn't attend the September one, but I have a report, if I may. I've been keeping up with it. So one thing I just wanted to report is that Shade Tree has put together some goals for going forward. Besides the regular applications that we review in Shade Tree, some of the goals that we're working on are how to communicate with township residents in understanding the ordinances and getting those clearly conveyed to township residents. And the other thing we're doing is our tree canopy in Radnor has been significantly reduced. So we're working with other stakeholders, board commissioners and conservancy, the WBA, township staff, to try to align our goals in ways we can bring our canopy back and start to take care of some of these trees and some of the things and areas where there's vines in the parks, so as you all know from Parks and Rec, our park systems have invasive vines in a lot of the areas. So those are some of our goals that we're working on. And we continue to, every single month, try to work together with all of these committees so that we can move forward.
Chris, I'd like to add to what Claire was speaking about. The conversations I've had with the manager is, as we do budget development this year, it's highly likely we're going to have to budget several $1 million for trees. Not just replacement trees, but the restoration, getting rid of the vines. And I'm sure everybody up here knows about the street tree program the township operates with the Conservancy in Chanticleer. That for $35 you can get a new tree planted in your front yard. I've done it twice and already applied for this year. It's a real bargain because they're nice sized trees that you get.
How well publicized is that? I mean, are people aware of that? Or adequately aware of that? Or is that one of the things you're talking about?
That's one of our goals, is to make sure that it's on the website and people know.
And one more question. What is or are some of the causes of the reduction in tree canopy? I mean, I know all about the vines and stuff, but what else? Is it just old, dying trees, like in my neighborhood in South Wayne, where they've been there for 150 years? And
There's lots of reasons. One, the storms we've had in the last couple of years have been significant, so we've lost some big trees there. Some of the building in the township, but will be replaced and being replaced as per the ordinance. And, ash borer, we're going to lose a bunch of ash trees that are dead. And the thing about an ash borer is if you don't take it down before it dies, it's really difficult to take down because they become so brittle. Right. And also the WBA is working pretty closely with Shade Tree as well, and with the township, those street trees that are within the town center, we are surveying them to see, and then out to the parks, to see what's in need and what needs to be fixed or taken down or taken care of, and what needs to be replaced. So those are all part of the goals.
Great, thank you, Claire. I mean, that's a challenge we have as a township, right? We have so many parks and so much open space, and we're trying to put more in there, but from a budget standpoint, it's hard to maintain all those grounds and do the work that needs to be done, especially when we've neglected it for years and years, and all of a sudden becomes a big item. So, John, if they do put money in the budget for tree work in the township, vine work, et cetera, that's obviously money, I think, that's well spent. Just tough to balance everything out, I'm sure, but fortunately, that's not my problem. Any other reports from other boards, et cetera? Chuck, is there something you'd like to talk about from the school board standpoint?
Well, the school board is moving forward on the Emlyn Tunnel Comfort Station, so that should come before the Facilities Committee, I think. Your people have been invited to give some type of presentation, I think, or something like that.
We were, but my understanding
It
through
was
Bob
canceled.
is that, well, my understanding through Bob is that he was working out directly with Ken, so.
Yeah, that was something that we had a discussion about because of our last meeting here when we said that that's what they do, because maybe whatever, I said that the township manager and the superintendent should be the ones that are working at the details because we're a board that gives direction. And so is the school board. So those two guys. And I think that could be what's happening at that point. So with that taken care of, the trails, they'll be giving a presentation to, I think, the Facilities Committee also. And the school is very interested in what's happening. We had a little talk about the communication, increasing the amount of communication between what's happening in the trails and the schools and the township and everybody. So they're coming before us because the district has not signed off on anything yet. And I think it would be a good idea to get that out of the way so that we can then move forward on that and have it completed. So things are moving forward. Yep.
Great, Chuck, thank you. If you could just, it's a process we want to move forward as quickly as we can, obviously. So if you see a hitch, maybe share it with Tammy, myself, so that if we need to get involved, we can kind of get involved. And I'm not sure what we could do, but
Right. I don't see any hitches coming about. I think the piece with Bob and Ken is just something that we need to have happen. We need
Yep.
the manager and the superintendent to be able to pick up a phone and work things out and then take care of it. And if they need guidance from us or approvals from the commissioners, then they can go about that type of it. But
Okay.
that way, I think it's getting done in a more effective manner.
great.
So, yeah, I don't see anything happening in negative. And it would be the same way. If you see anything, just, give us a call directly. You can just call me, and, I'll find out whatever we need to get done. But we're interested in moving it as quickly as possible, too.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
I think that's it for the committee reports. I'm going to jump to old business. I'm actually going to start with item B, baseball practice infield project. I believe that topic was discussed at the Board of Commissioners meeting on Monday evening, and Commissioner Abel made a presentation to the board showing what they'd like to do. We had a quick presentation on this back in July, I think, just about the idea, the concept. But the idea is to where the tennis courts are at Philip Home Park, just off the parking lot there. To the left of it, as you're facing the tennis courts, is an open area, somewhat wet area because it's too close to the creek. And Radnor Wayne Little League had an idea about putting a practice infield in that area to the left of the tennis courts. And evidently they've done some legwork over the past couple of months to talk to some neighbors over there, as I understand it. to put some rough drawings together about how they see that infield going and what they'd need to accomplish that, where they would move the batting cages that are there now during the season, and trying to, I guess, figure out also from a budget standpoint how that will work. And so Commissioner Abel asked me to bring that up at our meeting this evening to let all of you know that there's conversation about that, and he's asked the Board of Commissioners to give some consideration to it. The board asked that they kick it back down to us. Commissioner Abel is not able to be here this evening to make his presentation. I know Tom is here with Robert Wayne Little League, and I'll invite you up in a second if you've got some comments on it. But I think what I'd like to see from our board is hear Tom's comments about it, have some discussion this evening. But I think although Commissioner Abel said that the neighbors were okay with it, I think we need to have it on our agenda earlier than we had it, which was yesterday on the agenda for this meeting. Invite any neighbors to come out and speak to it next month. And if we get some feedback from them and we have our questions answered and we feel comfortable making a recommendation, we can certainly do so. I'm not necessarily in favor or against it, but we really haven't had any conversation about it at this board in a quick presentation. So I'm going to invite Tom, if you would like to come up and, give us 5-10 minutes on the genesis of it, the goals and the impacts, and the financial thing. That'll at least get us in a position where next month, hopefully, we can invite the public out, have it as an agenda item, and go from there.
Sounds great.
Great.
Thank you, Chris. I'm Tom McWilliams, the president of Radnor Wayne Little League. Good evening, everybody. I don't know if I have the picture that Commissioner Abel put up the other night. I'm not sure. Oh, there we go. Look at that. A little blurry, but pretty good. So the idea, for those not familiar with Warren Philippone, is between the creek and the tennis courts, what is currently there for about 5 of the 8 to 9 usable months a year for Philippone Park are temporary batting cages. The area gets a little swampy, so I think quite a number of years ago we started with 6 temporary batting cages. This year we were down to 1. What tends to happen is because the area is swampy, the tie downs that we use don't hold in the ground. So when a storm rips through, it tips the cages over, and you get a bad enough storm, you get cages destroyed. Other issues with that area that we've encountered principally relate to the utilization of the area and the safety of the kids. That area is in essence used for coaches to hit ground balls to kids, pitchers to warm up. The baseball fields at Warren Philippone don't have bullpens, so generally the pitchers are warming up in that area. And then, as I mentioned earlier, there are multiple batting cages. So you have kids hitting, pitching, having ground balls hit at them in a completely unstructured, often relatively swampy space. My son actually played there, I guess, 2 years ago. We did have a child get hit with a thrown ball that he walked in between people playing catch unexpectedly. The child wasn't injured in any appreciable way, but it sort of brought to mind that that area, while we try to relay to our coaches what we want them doing and not doing there, it doesn't always work out the way we want it. So the concept here is a structured area where we would have fencing to the extent necessary to keep the kids safe and structured in their play and what they're doing to warm up, while not significantly interfering with the aesthetics of that portion of the park. It would, in talking with the neighbors, we had an on-site with the township manager, Commissioner Abel, Tammy, several of the neighbors. It would probably require some sort of minor regrade of the area to try to take the swampiness out. But the neighbors were on board to the extent there'll be a little bit of minor excavation necessary.
And I'm just going to interrupt you real quick. I wish somebody would have invited somebody from this board to be part of that meeting.
Our apologies. So we will absolutely do that going forward. To the extent there's minor excavation needed, I think the neighbors were on board with that and helping with it, and we'll obviously need dirt if we're making an infield and pitcher's mounds, and the neighbors were going to provide that. So they were highly supportive of the project when we talked about it. Just to very briefly run through the structure of it, over along this side, you can see there are 2 batting cages. These would be permanent structure to support the batting cages, although the batting cages would simply be netting that we would take down. If the board would like to see what we envision, it's actually the exact system we have over at Enke Park now without the artificial turf underneath. So it would just be grass beneath, but it's nets hanging from tensioned wires between 15-foot tall poles. So along the fence line of the tennis courts, we would envision a double fence to protect the township's fence on the tennis courts from being struck by the balls that were hit into the net. And either the fence that we would erect, the double fence, or on the township's fence, we would need 4 poles to support these batting cages that would have to be 15 foot high if we did the same thing we did at Enke. We found we could probably get away with the poles being a little shorter than what we did here, but we didn't know that when we had these put up. But I'm giving this board the same numbers that we used. If we move out from that, along here, we would have another fence at the back of the practice infield area. We want to keep this area strictly to an infield. It would extend a few feet beyond what an average infield would, but we don't want to create an outfield, principally for the reason we don't want coaches or kids hitting the ball out, trying to hit fly balls or anything along those lines. So we want to limit it to just an infield space. This fence on this side of the batting cages, so on the infield side of the batting cages, we would have a fence there, again, to protect from the net swinging out, but principally just to put the other side of the poles from which the batting cages would hang on that side. I should note that while in this area over here, the fence would extend out, we would envision, just to keep it safe so you don't have poles just sticking out of the ground. We could shrink that area significantly. This drawing shows 2 batting cages, each 60 feet long. The ones at Enke are 55 feet long. We wouldn't need them to be that long, and we could modify the size. So if we needed to shrink those to 40 feet each, so that this corner lined up, so we'd have a fence here and a fence here, and it would come to a corner, and you wouldn't need that extended fence area, we could certainly do that. The 3rd batting cage you see there, which is this one, along the left field line, would be our one remaining usable temporary batting cage. So that one we would put it up and take it down at the beginning of the season, then at the end of the season. That area too, all around the infield, we would have openings for ingress and egress, but we would envision having, except for the right field fence that would be taller to protect the batting cage area. The other fences would probably be 4 feet lower fences, so it doesn't interfere with that part of the view into the park. And then on the outside, you can see we have 2 bullpen areas that would also be protected by lower fencing, so that now you could have kids warming up, folks hitting infield, and people in the batting cages, but they're all separated and protected by fencing, so we won't have balls flying around hitting people unintentionally. So that's the concept. And Chris, your point's well taken. We're very happy anytime. I'm happy to talk to Commissioner Abel too about it and meet with folks from this board out there to kind of walk the area just to see what's going on in the current state of it.
If I could just interject, I apologize, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple quick things. Like, the meeting was very impromptu, I think. This was actually a project that was brought forth by a resident, the resident that lives across from the park. So he wants to contribute funding towards it, that which would be complemented by funding exclusively from Radnor Wayne Little League. So this isn't an item that the township has budgeted or planned within, the greater improvements within the park. We've obviously tried to, work together in that by, making sure there's a little bit more distance by moving the tennis courts over the 10 feet that I know we had briefly talked about, I think when this was presented back in July, as an option, to be able to accommodate a greater portion of space in that area. But I just want to make sure that that was clear, that there is a resident that had stepped up kind of spearheading this project and kind of rallied everybody together on a quick meeting. So at the time when we met, I think it was just still very preliminary. I didn't even think we really knew all too much what we were out there really talking about, because it really was generated by the resident.
Yeah. We were invited to the meeting, but we will make sure you folks are invited to the next one. And Tammy's point is very well taken, and that's very important. The Little League, as I said, most of what's happening here is dirt and perhaps some regrading, but the fencing, the poles, the batting cages, the support for everything, the double fence, the Little League is budgeting for that would come out of our pocket.
Can I ask a question? I have two questions and one statement. First of all, I'm a steward on that park. Would you put me on your list specifically, Tammy, for
Absolutely.
anything? I'm happy to come out there. Here's my question. Is any of the fencing higher than the tennis court fencing?
No, the fencing would not be. The poles from which the batting cages would hang, I think the fence there we said was 12 feet. The fencing that would
Sounds
go up
familiar.
would be either 8 feet or 10 feet, so it would be lower than
Okay.
the tennis court fencing. But the poles, as I said, at Enki are 15 feet. The ones
So,
that are over there, we
but-
could probably cut those to 12 if we
So
needed.
close then?
Yes, yes,
If you got them to 12, then they would be sort of flush?
Even with the current fence.
Okay, and then my other question was, and now I've lost it. Oh, is the tennis courts going to be moved 10 feet?
Well, 10 feet of them are going to be cut off, okay, and there's going to be demo done to 10 feet there, looking at it from this view to the left.
So what
And then they're going to be reconstructed 10 feet in the other direction towards the comfort station to be
Okay,
able
so
to
we're-
accommodate the distance. So
We're losing area around the actual tennis court?
we're not really losing any area. I mean, we're going to lose area closer to the comfort station, I guess, yes, because they are going to be closer to the comfort station 10 feet, 10 more feet. So the tennis courts were going to be
You're just
totally
shifting them over.
reconstructed
Yeah.
anyway.
Okay.
So yeah, it's not really like shifting it, but the 3 courts will stay intact. We're not going to be eliminating any of the court play or anything. Like, the size of what's there now isn't going to change in any way. It's basically going to be moved over 10 feet.
And then they're going to be redone anyway, that was.
They were, yes.
Yeah.
So that's why 10 feet are going to be demoed on one side and then reconstructed
Okay.
on the other side. And that's what we've been working through in the engineering planning. We're working to finalize that very quickly so we can get this project out to bid.
What's the additional cost to demo that 10 feet on one side and put it in on the other side? Because that's not an expense that would have been incurred if this project wasn't being discussed, correct?
True. So that's one of the questions I had for Gannett Fleming when we, started to really talk more seriously about this project. So I can get a projection on what those numbers would be. We requested those as we go through this process before we bid to understand that in terms of how it might impact. But I don't think it's significant. It's not as significant, I think, as we originally kind of thought.
Okay.
We should note for the board members that it's not, in our view, and again, this is preliminary, but our initial measurements indicate that the tennis courts don't need to be moved to accommodate this project. It actually fits in the space that's there now if the tennis courts stayed where they are. I think the parties that came out that day thought it might be a little bit more aesthetically pleasing and create a little more area for the kids on this side to move around before they get to the hill that slopes down towards the creek. But that accommodation isn't necessary because of the size of this project.
I have some questions. With respect to the composition of the field, is that going to be grass and dirt just like any other field in the township?
Yes.
One issue when I was on your side of this was there were some issues on some of these batting cage areas as to which party, Township versus Little League, was responsible for mowing, keeping the dirt and whatnot. That might be a little far down the road, but has that been considered or discussed at this point as to the division of responsibility there?
It is absolutely being considered, and it has been raised. Little League does have an additional, we have a field groomer now at Enki to take care of the dirt. Little League does have an additional tractor that could be used if it was Little League's responsibility to take care of this infield. We would be happy to do that. The problem that we have at the moment is we're not sure where to put the tractor in the park. We certainly have enough volunteers that probably folks would be willing to take the tractor back and forth to groom the field and or mow the infield grass if that was necessary, but we're still working out the details on that.
And I guess what is probably a related question deals with fencing. With respect to what would be the first and third base lines where the bullpens are, is the only fencing that's envisioned something in order of a 3 or foot high fence that would run on the field side of the bullpen? Or is this more of a perimeter fencing around the entirety of that infield?
It is a perimeter fencing around the entirety of the infield and around the bullpens, but with fairly wide openings for access. That would be what would be envisioned. Because the kids that, just so we're clear with the board, the kids that play in this field are, for the most part, 8 and 9 years old. So the ball doesn't always go where they intend it to go when they throw it. So we are trying to create, again, from a safety perspective, a little bit of structure around where the ball is likely to be thrown, so we don't have 500 balls winding up in the creek and stuff like that.
The dimensions on the infield, I'm gathering that's a standard 60-40 dimension that a Little League field would have?
Yes, it's a 46-foot pitcher's mound and 60-foot base pass, yes.
Last question, I think. The border between the batting cages and the tennis courts. As I heard two different potential concepts. One was a second fence that the Little League would put in. I'm envisioning a cyclone type fence that would almost piggyback to the cyclone fence that's the perimeter of the tennis court.
Yes, that's the current plan.
Okay. And that's because those nets have movement, and if they move, they're going to bang against the newly constructed fence that the township's going to put in
Yes.
on the tennis courts.
And
Okay.
the poles for that fence, et cetera. So.
And then I heard something that there might be an alternative. I wasn't quite sure I followed the alternative, or did I just make that up?
Well, I did mention a possible alternative out here to this fence, because as I say, it may not be great to have, it's only this pole. It's the last pole for the second batting cage that's kind of out there on an island by itself if we did 60-foot batting cages. So the option would be we shrink the batting cages to, I think the actual number is about 44, 45 feet, which would bring that pole down to line up with center field, if you will, right here. So then we don't need the fence extension all the way down there, but we would still need the poles from which to hang the batting cages.
Maybe one more. That area is swampy, as you mentioned. Is there anything being done to address that swampy nature of that area, especially if you're going to increase the foot traffic on it?
We suspect there will be some level of regrade necessary. I don't know. That's not my bailiwick, and we haven't reached that level of discussion, but I don't know whether it'll have to be raised or simply leveled. The ground in that location, as I know some folks on this board know, is extremely uneven, and the water tends to sit in the low spots, so it might be sufficient just to level the ground there, and that would take out the low spots and the swampiness.
Plenty of time.
You yield your time?
I yield my time back to the chairman.
I just have a
Thank you,
couple
Senator.
of questions, and it's to do with the I guess, the process a little bit about now. Will you guys have to submit plans to the township? Is there any wetlands or floodplain issues? Because you say it's swampy, it's this, it's that. Because this is somewhat considered I don't want to say a structure because I'm not a lawyer, but will you have to go through, will this plan have to go through anybody besides us to be built? I don't know.
Maybe I'll tackle that first, and then Tammy can fix all the wrong things I'll say. The entire surface will be permeable. It's just grass and dirt. So I wouldn't think we create any issues because we're not creating impermeable surfaces. As far as I am aware, there's not a wetland here. We do have a minor issue. There's a dotted line you can see kind of floating out here, that there's a creek. So there's a setback necessary from the creek, but that line, and again, this was measured by folks who are not experts in the field, and the line may vary a couple feet one way or the other, but it's pretty far over towards the creek from where this project would start. So that's my understanding of it, but Tammy, please feel free. And as I mentioned earlier, Bob was involved in that initial meeting and some of these discussions. So I've not heard that concern yet, but.
No, I mean, I'm not aware of it being a wetland in that area either. I know over in Beau Connor, we do have some of those areas that kind of fit that, that description. Our township engineer would definitely have to take a look at it, and look at it. I think we would want to have, something more than just a hand-drawn type of plan, of course. And I think once, we get a copy of that and that's submitted, that's where we would take that internal review relative to, any of the township, codes or engineering requirements or setback requirements, riparian buffer requirements and so forth. But I think, though, that the changing of the tennis courts by adding the additional 10 feet does work to the advantage of the project overall. So, I think we would just kind of go from there, once there's something a little more detailed that's put together.
Thanks, Tammy.
Please.
Tom, I have one more question. From Radnor Wayne Little League's point of view, what do you see the use look like? I mean, I'm just curious.
From a volume of use, or
Yeah.
why do we want to do it, Claire?
Kind of both. I
Okay.
mean,
That's fair.
Okay.
A volume of use, to be frank, we don't see any difference from the volume of use that's currently going on there, which is why it's a bit of a pill for us to swallow to do it. But it's the reason why we would want to do it. The second part of that question is safety of the kids. The way that area is used right now and all the things that it's used for, somebody's possibly going to get hurt at some point. So Little League would like to do this just to try to do everything we can to make sure that doesn't happen.
I have a question for Tammy. In terms of the project we've talked about before with the fence replacement at that complex, are these two projects at all interdependent on each other in terms of a timing standpoint? In other words, would this Little League project impair the ability to go forward with the larger project that we've talked about before?
No, it wouldn't. I mean, we're moving forward. We started quickly in, re-engineering the project to make it fit, to move it the 10 additional feet, just to be able to better accommodate this, because, I think from what we understood is that, the cost differential, maybe won't be so significant that it would impair the project. The project does have a ceiling, in terms of a budget. But no, that project's moving, and wherever this lands, whenever it lands, is definitely not moving contingent in any way on that one.
Thank you.
So, which is a very good point, because if we are doing that and we're moving it to 10 feet and we have a bulldozer there on the property moving, redoing that, it would be nice if they just kind of went over to the side and leveled that off for you. Just saying, the guy's there.
Maybe
Well
if the
said.
project is further down the road, once that begins, we can get that contractor to do that gratis. It would certainly be worth the ask.
We're okay with that.
I'm going to share an opinion, and it's only my personal opinion on this. And I think, it's been a bunch of years since I've gone through Little League with my son and coach and everything. And I don't remember using that area 10 years ago when our boys were going through there. So maybe things have changed a little bit and kids are getting more work in, which is great. We never have enough fields for kids to play on, et cetera. But I also think that those tennis courts get a lot of play. Whenever I go by there, people are using those tennis courts. And I worry a little bit about folks who aren't baseball folks feeling squeezed by all the activity on the two existing fields and then activity to the left of it as well. And if it's already being used by kids and this is a way to try and make it safer, I get that. But I don't love the idea of batting cages right on top of the fence where people are trying to play tennis and have an enjoyable husband and wife or a mom and a couple kids out there. it feels too pushed in, too squished, too forced to me, having all that right on top of it. So again, I'm just sharing a personal opinion with you by looking at it and hearing it. I would love the chance, maybe Claire, with her being the steward of the park, and myself and anybody else, maybe we could get out there and walk it with you and kind of see where stakes are, get a little better feel for it. And I do think it's important that we have neighbors and tennis players come in and express their opinion at a meeting that we have here, people to use the park for other things than baseball. I'd love to see those batting cages somewhere else, not, if we're going to go forward with it, not up against the tennis courts. And again, I'm not talking for anybody else sitting up here. That's just me personally. So those are my thoughts.
I think that's a great point. Commissioner Abel and I had discussed, as I mentioned, there have been variously between 1 and 6 batting cages in that area over at least the last 5 or 6 years that I'm familiar with. We had discussed, rather than doing that, with those 2 batting cages there kind of very, very close, impinging on the tennis courts, using the temporary batting cages that we're putting up and down now anyway. There's one here. We could put another one right next to it, and we could even go 3 of them going out that way. The main thrust of the project is not necessarily dependent from Little League standpoint or where the batting cages go, just that they are separate from the bullpen and practice infield area. So your point's well taken, Chris, that if we could just open up that area and put nothing there, but still have the practice infield, the bullpens, and just move the batting cages up here, which would accomplish our goals from a safety perspective.
But then you have poles that aren't hidden up against that batting cage that are in the middle of the park area. In other words, come October, the end of October, when you yank the cages down, if you have them up against the tennis court, the poles are, at least they blend into the fencing, whereas if you pull them out into the grassy area, you're going to have a series of poles that you look out when you see that particular portion of the park.
I apologize, Bill. I meant the temporary cages. So we would do away
All
with the
temporary
permanent
cages.
poles. Yes, so we would do all
I
2
see.
or 3
I see.
of the same cages that we use now. Just put those up and take them down every year in early August.
Tom, quick question for you. What's the separation? Sorry, a voice from somewhere.
From above.
Sorry. What's the separation? So like if I'm playing first base or I'm playing shortstop or third base and I back up, to go get a fly ball or a ball that's like out of the way, what's the separation distance in between where the cages might be then at that respect and then the child who's going for the ball that's going to get that ball?
I would envision that we would still retain the fence between the batting cage and the infield area, but to your point, Tammy, there is not the same amount of foul territory, if you will, in this design that you would have on a normal baseball field. So again, that is by design in some respects. You don't want coaches hitting the ball in such a way that they might hit it 15 feet foul because they're probably hitting it a lot harder than they should, and likewise with the kids. So we wanted to not give them 20 feet on either side of the base paths to invite them to start striking the ball harder in what's supposed to be a focused practice area for 8 and 9-year-old kids.
I just know sometimes I do actually hit the ball to my son because he plays baseball too, but sometimes you'll hit it and you hit the ball in the air and it goes a little further back than you wanted to because you wanted to hit a grounder and you wanted to hit it, good and, light to them, within the space that's there. But sometimes it goes a little farther, but that doesn't stop the kid from going and getting it.
We don't have any coaches in Radnor Lane Little League that mishit the ball.
I figured it was just me, mom, son playing baseball.
Well, in that respect, and I apologize now, I better understand your question. I would suggest probably the netting of the batting cages would be enough that the ball wouldn't come flying into the batting cage and hit a kid, for example. As far as the kid running to get it, there is the possibility that they would run into the fence, at which point my suggestion would be we should probably pad the fence, which we had admittedly not thought of, but that's something we could consider where to try to further add to the safety aspect, at least towards the field of play, add padding, even if we don't fence the entire back area where presumptively it'll just be a coach playing, but where the ball might be struck, add padding at least to the top rail of the fence, so the kids run into it, they'll bounce off, because kids are made of rubber anyway, right? They just bounce.
Tom, I have a question.
Yes.
Not to belabor the point, and since I'm new to the game, has turf been discussed in terms of putting in a turf? I know that was, I had heard that down the line, but would that be simpler in terms of maintenance and overall cost long-term?
Absolutely, and to be totally honest with you, Bill, I don't think we can afford turf. So that's, Enki, the turf at Enki kind of exhausted our resources from that standpoint. And what we would, bless you, Chris, what we would envision here is this design, if we ever came into more substantial resources, this design would probably allow us to just turf over the area in a manner not dissimilar to what we've done at Enki. We would just have to raise it up and put that drainage system underneath to maintain the permeability of the ground. But we would raise it up all the way around inside the fence line. So we just raise the whole thing up and put the turf down.
Great. Any more questions? All right, Tom, thanks very much. Maybe over the next month before our next meeting, if we get an opportunity to get out there and take a look at that, that'd be great. And Tammy, one other thing would be helpful. I know that Steve McNellis doesn't really attend our meetings, which is fine. I get it. We always used to have a Public Works representative at our meetings, but I think it would be important to have Public Works give us their feedback in terms of if this field went in, what impact would that have to what they do going forward? Because we like to build things in Radnor, and a lot of times we don't think about what the cost is going to be after we build things. So I'd like the input from Public Works before we would make any kind of recommendations on this.
I can do that. The only thing that I would recommend is that, maybe there's some sort of a boundary that's defined around this project that becomes the responsibility of Radnor Wayne Little League.
Yeah, that's fine from March until June or July. I think it's raining out. But after July, people go away and you get to the fall and they're moving to soccer and football and things like that. I'm not sure you're going to get somebody out there to cut that lawn. So I think it's important enough to understand and see what Public Works thinks about it. Make sure that if we are going to build it, it has the access for them to, even if they're running mowers across the dirt too, easily for them to maintain it. Because they're going to maintain part of the season.
We can definitely engage Public Works in that process.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay. Commissioner Abel had also asked me to put Young Lungs at Play program on the agenda. It's an old business topic. We had the presentation in July, I believe, from the gentleman from the state that talked about the program, got a lot of good information about the program. We were waiting to get some feedback from the Board of Health, feedback from, I believe, our police department about enforcement. If we were to recommend to the Board of Commissioners and they were to pass a regulation within the township about that, and also a better understanding of the cost involved with that. Commissioner Abel couldn't make it this evening, but asked me to just kind of, bring this up again. The Board of Health, at their meeting, I had their, I guess, unofficial minutes, but basically what they recommended was to allow to have a program in place for no smoking parks, but to have a designated area in each park away from the playing areas for smoking to be permitted. I think that goes in direct contrast to what this program is all about. And I'm not sure they made that recommendation to the Board of Commissioners. It was just a statement that was made in their minutes. Again, they were unofficial minutes that I saw. So I wanted to bring it up here and see if anybody on this board had any thoughts about this. I did ask Commissioner Abel to come next month since this is his initiative, and we really haven't received any official direction from the Board of Commissioners with regard to this initiative. Are they looking for something from us, or is this something that Commissioner Abel is trying to push along and trying to get the commissioners to support as well? But I thought we'd have a quick conversation if we'd like to, if anybody has any thoughts about the topic before we push it down the road to next month.
My recollection is we asked if a designated smoking area would be possible under the Young Lungs plan. I believe we were told no, that the eligibility for the free signs was triggered on an absolute bar. So I don't know that that's an option if we're looking to get into the signage. I guess it depends on how we look at this. I think if we look at it as a public policy standpoint, I think this strikes me as something that we're trying to fix a problem that doesn't exist. I don't know that there's a large outcry of people and brawls breaking out over smoking. I know that I've lived in the parks as a citizen and also in the baseball capacity, and I can't remember any issue ever developing in the thousands of hours I spent there. If we want to set forth as an educational standpoint, we want to send a message, that's another story, and I think that's worthy of discussion and worthy to pursue. But if it's a public policy, I don't know that we're really advancing the ball on anything we need to advance it on.
I'm not in favor of any kind of advertising for a designated area or not. I think that I like the idea that, Bill, you said about education. It's there to send a message. But I think enforcement is not even, do we spend money on enforcement? No.
All right. Tammy, were you able to ascertain any costs? I know they would supply signs for free, but that's just the actual sign itself. We would have to supply all the poles and the manpower to put those in. Do you have any feel for what the cost of township might be for something like that?
No, because I think when we talked about it in September, my concern was how many signs do you want? Do you want a sign at each ball field? Do you want a sign at every playground? Do you want one by every tennis court, where the tennis courts are? And then if we talk about a designated area, then there's signage to designate the area for the smoking. So sounds like a lot of signage. I think in order to determine, we need to understand what kind of signage we want to really put in the parks, even if they are the Young Lungs at Play signs, which are attractive signs. I mean, they look good, they're informative, attractive to a family that's there using the park, but how many of them do we really want throughout the park system, especially in light of, there really aren't overwhelming, pieces of feedback that at least I've heard over my years here and been here for a little while on this topic. And I could be wrong. Maybe there's more. I would ask the sports community, since those folks are there in the parks all the time, using the field, soccer, lacrosse, what kind of feedback do we see, do we hear? I think there's a lot of pieces here to look at.
Okay. John, is there anything you'd like to comment on with regard to this issue? I guess
Well,
as a commissioner.
Yeah, the interesting piece from the Board of Health meeting was their approach to it wasn't really so much about the Young Lungs at Play as it was about what does the state law permit. One of the members had done all the research and had slides about the state law. And that's why they got into, and it's also funny that for someone to say you can't get the signs, that seems to conflict with state law from what I saw in the Board of Health meeting. So that's kind of interesting. But they didn't even have complete agreement amongst themselves about outdoor smoking, if you will. That was the issue. So I left the meeting feeling that they supported the Young Lungs at Play program, but they felt that in order to comply with the state law, we had to designate a smoking area.
In your opinion, John, is there consensus or interest in the board as a whole of getting some kind of recommendation from this board?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I mean, Jake brought it up. The rest of the board said, send it to Parks and Rec.
Okay. Well, what I said to Commissioner Abel was, when I spoke to him on the phone this week, that I'd bring it up this week and see if there's any comments, which we've done. I suggested that he try and attend our next meeting to give us more in terms of where he's coming from on this and what he'd like to see from us. I think we know what he'd like to see from us, but I'm not seeing a huge outpouring from this group to move forward on at this point in time. So we'll invite him to come next month if he'd like to and talk about it, and kind of go from it at that point in time, if that's okay with everybody. Chuck?
I just have one question. The Young Lungs program, do they say, don't smoke around kids that are playing sports, but what does that mean? Is it like they don't have a footage, or they don't have, or what? That is a little bit confusing to me. Like how close, for instance, if somebody is coaching third base, okay, they shouldn't be smoking, okay? But if they're 100 yards away or whatever, I mean, does the Young Lungs program specify, they say you can't have it in the park to get it? Is
Young
that what
Lungs
it
isn't
is?
just about sports, it's about parks.
Okay, the park.
And it's
so-
no smoking in parks for the
okay.
benefit of young people using those parks for whatever purpose they would be using
So
it.
the program would dictate, to be part of the program, you can't smoke in the park?
Correct.
Okay, all right.
Well, just one comment. So if the Department of Health on behalf of the state attended our meeting and said, we can pass a law, that we can pass an ordinance, right, that says no smoking in the entire park property, which is what he said we can do, then I think that maybe conflicts with the Board of Health's understanding on what the state law is regarding this matter. So I think maybe that just needs to be clarified too, because if they made their decision based on the premise that there was a state law, that governed that, then, maybe if that law isn't true, then maybe they would have made a different recommendation.
Right. Although we did see a list of townships in the state that have done this already.
Right.
And, presumably they're not in violation of state law. I mean, I think Commissioner Abel, this is legwork that I think he needs to do a little bit of, for our benefit, because these are all questions we'll have for him next month. And I'll make it my point to shoot an email to him and just give him some feedback about what we did tonight.
And part of this, as I understand the Young Lungs That Play program, and I was over in Prospect Park, I think I mentioned to you previously, their approach there was that it was advisory. It wasn't a law that you can't smoke there. It was advisory that there are young lungs that play. Don't smoke here. So I think that might have it, but the section of the law was on a slide in front of us, and but always on these things we ask our solicitor, and I'd be glad to do that.
Yeah, that'd be great. I did reach out to the chair of the Board of Health and never got any feedback. I could try again, but it'd be nice to have some understanding of that. Yeah. Thank you, John.
Can I say one more thing?
Please.
It feels to me that we're asking for more problems by working this program through. Our park systems. I mean, the police have never had a complaint, right? Yeah, it's a solution asking for a problem, exactly. All right, that's.
I think we're all in agreement. Okay. Tammy, you have on here a review of the 2018 capital budget projects and stats projects. We've kind of gone, is there anything that we haven't touched on that you'd like to touch on with regard to that?
The only thing I would like to say, and I mean, I was prepared tonight if you want me to present in more detail on this. So there was an outline that I had given to our board, I think back in May, and then we looked at it again in June, and then in July, and what it showed was a breakout of 3 sections of projects. One was, of course, the bonded projects that we're working through, many of which have been completed, many of them which are substantially underway. And then the list of projects, it's pretty short, of the projects that were approved in 2018, and then those that were in the capital plan for 2019. Tonight, I had given you guys a copy of the budget for 2018. I didn't want to keep killing trees, but I think with Howard and Bill being new on the board, I wanted to make sure they had a copy of that just to kind of see that subset of what is included in the township budget, which in addition to those pages is like 400 more pages, double-sided. So what I wanted to do was just kind of highlight those, and then I also point out that I provided an update, so on a new sheet. So it's the same 3 sections,
Yep.
And then on the back of that sheet, I provided a whole list of projects, and those are the projects from 18 that weren't completed. Those are the projects from 2019 that would roll, obviously roll with the budget now into 19, and then also other things that have come to fruition over the last year of discussion. As we're always talking about the budget and the capital plan, it's a living, breathing document. It's always,
Right.
undergoing revisions and updates and, things that we see, feedback we get, from residents, things like that. So I provided a list. There's a number of projects that are on there. I just want to be clear that those are not all of the projects that I would believe that are going to be budgeted. I don't know that $2 million in projects are going to be budgeted for this year, and it's not an ask for that either. But what it is I just wanted to draw your attention to the project list, because I would like to get some input from this board on the projects that you would like to see for 2019 in terms of what the staff is going to be recommending, which we're currently in the process of putting together right now. As a matter of fact, I think next week is kind of the deadline on what we're going to submit, at least in the first rendition, that will go to the commissioners. So just to point out, there's no identified allocation for 2019. So, we don't have direction from the board at this point that, there's a certain amount of dollar amount that we have to spend towards park projects. I mean, as you could see over the years, that's varied. And then we were very fortunate in 15 to borrow the money. That was a substantial amount of park improvement projects that were within that, which we're, obviously still working on. So what I would just be looking for the board is just some idea of some of the projects that it would like to see or recommend as part of this, that then, we can kind of take and then carry on, that starts that process, because the board will be presented with the first rendition of the budget, I know, on October 22nd at their Monday meeting. And then that's going to start the conversation, I think, on a lot of different, pieces and parts of the budget in terms of how it becomes constructed.
So is this, Tammy, are you asking us of the 5 things that are listed in the last of those 3 categories, which we place a priority on, or things that aren't on this list that we place a priority on?
Well, on the back, there's more than 5 projects. So if you flip it over,
I see.
There's
Okay.
there's a lot of projects. So, like, for instance, we know that the roof improvements to that portion of the roof at the rack that's going to need to be replaced, that's an eminent item. In my opinion, I think we need to protect that building if we're going to continue to operate out of it. So I think that's important. I mean, you see that's estimated at $150,000 cost. Again, I don't want to get too hung up on the cost, because some of these are estimations at this point. They haven't been vetted, they haven't been contracted, so we don't really have those details, but we have ballpark amounts. So I think it's really starting to hone in on, what do we want to concentrate on as priority projects for 2019, and that's what I would be looking for input on from the Parks and Recreation Board. So for instance, at the bottom of that list, I took a couple of projects that had been allocated in the 18 plan for 19. The Capelli Golf Range signage, the Yankee Park sunshade, I think those are all important projects, but, where do they fall in the order of magnitude on this list in terms of priority? And I think those are the things that we want to look at. Odorisio Park, we know there's a lot of projects there to be done. Arguably that could be a project that is bonded, in the future, this year, the future, and, moving forward. I know Cowan Park is another park. We have a lot of improvements that need to be made there. As you can see, the list goes on. I'm happy to go through each of those one by one, and we can talk about those, but I wanted to make sure that the board kind of sees those. And these projects, a lot of them aren't new projects. They have been within the plan and allocated, I'll call it out years, within the plan. Some, like I said, the roof is new at the rack. That's something that's become more eminent in the last year. The lighting and the ballast replacement at that facility is another one that's kind of come to fruition. That's something I think we're going to have to address. But things like the comfort station replacement over at Odorisio, the playground replacement, the basketball court replacement, I mean, those are all projects that are sitting there in the plan that need to be funded at some point. And it's a question of priority and how we want to get these done.
Yeah, and I think you had given us a couple meetings ago what had been kind of placeholder in terms of capital items going forward over the next 5 years, 5-year plan, et cetera. Again, not speaking for the other members on the board, but I guess my thoughts on a lot of this is one, we probably need to digest this a little bit, and I would ask each person who's been assigned a certain park, et cetera, to take a look at these things and provide, feedback or their thoughts with regard to what Tammy's has on here. I know time is short. I'm not sure when the budgeting process is completed. When do they vote on the budget? Finalize it?
They probably won't vote until December.
Okay. So we have some time. So I think it's important if each one of us and take our assigned parks, and Bill, I'll get with you on that. Take a look at what Tammy has on here. But I also think, Tammy, that you and your staff are going to know better than we are because you deal with it every day, whereas we deal with it once a month, and then the times that we're in the parks otherwise. We'd be looking for your recommendations on that in terms of what should be proposed from a budget standpoint. And I think we also all know historically that not a lot of capital money is assigned towards parks traditionally, especially knowing if John thinks there's going to be some tree work done in the township that's going to cost millions of dollars. I'm not sure how much money there's going to be for park work, et cetera. So I don't want to spend a ton of time on something that I'm not convinced we'll see a lot of results out of unless I hear differently from or get different direction from Lisa and the board on that. I'm certainly welcome for other comments from board members with regard to this, but my thought would be take this list for parks, look at it for parks that you're involved with, look at the budget, et cetera, and see what comments you have and get those circulated to me ahead of time, ahead of our meeting next month, so we can be a little bit more organized for this topic. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to Tammy during the month and ask her specifics with regard to what she has out here. And then maybe we can come up with a priority list, in time for the budget process with our meeting next month, if that works for you, Tammy, unless you were just looking for something more specific from us tonight.
Well, I think we've been talking about this since May and talking about the parks, and I know getting out into the parks and seeing some of the things that are there, because there very well could be things in addition to this list that you folks as stewards have seen as you've been out and about there. Maybe not, maybe I'm wrong. So I would like to look for input. If you feel more comfortable looking to that to next month, I think there's still time. I think our meetings seem to come around pretty quickly, so I don't think we're out of time in that regard, because again, we're beginning the process now. I know that we're going to have a submission that goes to the board on the 22nd, where they're going to see the kind of the first rendition of the budget. It's usually it's not the gospel, let's say. At that point, it's just the starting point for conversation with the board.
I have a general question, and maybe since I'm only 3 years on this board, I'm not sure about it. It's a process question. For instance, we know we're going to do the comfort stations and work at Tennell Park. Is the historical precedent to say, hey, we have a couple items that we still need there, the walking path and the parking lot, while we're there and doing it, let's get it all done, versus do we try to piecemeal in a number of spots? If you look at Odoricio, there's 4 things on this list. Do we pick them off one at a time? Do we try to knock them all out at once? I don't know, or maybe there isn't precedent.
Well, there certainly is an economy of scale of doing it all at once. Look at what happened at Clemmer-Crown. And then at the end of that project, you have a great project, and, the park's not going to need any attention for a really long time other than, what goes into an operating standpoint, for the most part, unless something was to break down. But that, usually is an insurance issue at that point. Fenimore Woods is another great example of which we'll be working on real soon. There's certainly an economy of scale of that. But, looking back on the money at Tennell that's been allocated at this point, are there funds that might be available to do either of the projects that are listed within there? Probably not, based on what's been allocated. So that might be difficult, at least at this point, for any of those that sit out there. Now, Odoricio is one that doesn't have a project that was per the borrowing. So, that's, we could look at that as being one of those that, is more comprehensive versus, one year we do a comfort station, the next year we do a basketball court, the next year we do something else.
My thinking is, while you're there, do it right and get it done. I think McCrone's a great example of that. Lord willing, we shouldn't have to do much there for decades other than maintenance, and if something happens, you're already going to dig up the walking path, for instance, to Tunnel. You're already going to be playing around the parking lot. Why not just get it all done? Just me speaking out loud, you asked for a little bit of input, and I'll at least give one person's input on that. And it doesn't make sense to piecemeal Odorizio. Let's get that all done at once and make that another jewel of a park again.
Can I piggyback on that?
Please.
I'm looking at this list, Tammy, and I think it's in keeping of what the budget has been outlined over the last couple of years. And like Odorizio, I'm looking at that, and I agree with that. I have a question about, does a capital improvement have to be a structure? Can a capital improvement be, for example, I know at Clemacrone, we talked about that area that was all marshy and meadowy and can it be some sort of work to be done to clear something, do we ever put that into the budget?
Well, generally, a capital item is like that's a 25-year item. It's not, yeah, I mean, I think it just kind of depends on the amount of work.
Okay. For example, I'm thinking of the West Wayne Preserve, which you can't now even walk in because it's just been taken over. It used to be a grove.
You never could walk in the West Wayne Preserve.
Ever? Well,
Nope.
It was kind of marshy, yeah. It's even.
Always been too entangled, too wet. It's never
Yeah.
been something that's been publicly
Access.
publicly accessed
So we just
park.
I'm confused why we even made it a park. If we just owned the property and just had it be.
Well, I think
green.
we acquired the land so that in the future it could be used for stormwater management in and around that region.
Okay.
And then piggybacked with that and ability to be able to have folks go in and experience the park in some way by boardwalks and
Right. Okay.
groves and things like that.
So those are my just questions. I mean, I think this is totally in keeping. I had one more thought on Bo Connor. Is the pickleball idea still being tossed around?
Well, it will be part of the bid package as an ad, as like an alternate. So if
Okay.
that project, we don't want to end up in a situation when that project comes back in over bid.
Right.
Then we
okay.
have an issue, where we either have to find funding somewhere else to be able to accommodate it, because when we originally allocated that part per the bond, we didn't say we wanted to build a pickleball court as part of that. So we outlined that as an alternate so that when those bids come back and it can afford it, then we would add that in, as
Okay.
was the case with the basketball court as part of that too.
Okay, so to me, this list feels pretty comprehensive, and it doesn't feel like it's missing a lot, but I'm happy to go back and relook.
Why don't we do this, folks? It's very easy. I do it. I'm sure some of you do it, to come to our meetings once a month, take our stuff home, put it on a shelf, and then come back to our meeting the next month. Holiday time isn't too far away, so once we get past our November meeting, things get a little crazy, et cetera. If we could all make a dedicated effort over the next 30 days to really focus on our parks, take a look at this budget that Tammy's given us on just our parks. I'm not asking you to look at everything, just your parks. Take a look at this list that Tammy's provided for us and provide some sound feedback to me a week before. So you got 3 weeks to do it. A week before our meeting, I'll try and accumulate that information and share it with Tammy. If you need questions, pick the phone up and ask Tammy, send her email, et cetera. Let's try and put some legwork in over the next month if we could, and provide some feedback with regard to these items, so we know what's important to us. But also doing that knowing that there's $2 million listed on here. We're not going to spend $2 million, John, on capital items for our parks next year that aren't already part of a bond issuance.
Well, I plan to fight for everything that we've been laying out in the budget for the last, it's in the 5-year plan.
Right.
My personal opinion is we have to raise taxes. So that'll be part of the discussion. Some of the other projects actually aren't happening because we haven't got the matching funds we need for them. An example, for the trail extension, we had put in for $250,000, we got 53,000 or something, because the state in its political wisdom gave out a ton of little awards rather than some of the big requests, so therefore nobody will do anything. Politics being what it is. There are several commissioners that agree with me about the parks and the importance of the parks, so we'll work to do as much as we can.
Okay. All right, does that work for everybody on our board?
Do have a quick question?
Yeah, please.
Or comment or whatever. The 3 parks that each one of us have, okay? One of them's Macron for me. And the other 2, you know, I frequent them a lot. But my heart and soul is with Artoricio Park. Now, I'm not, you know, listed there as one of the custodians, I guess we'll say, for that park. But would I be stepping on anybody else's toes by saying, you know, listing certain things or trying to make something a priority there?
Not at all. No.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure.
No.
Just wanted to make sure.
I'm sure that whoever has Odoricio, which I think is Claire, will welcome your input. And that goes across the line, right?
Yeah.
If you have a park that you're not assigned to, but you have thoughts on it, please share with that person who's responsible for that park. Yeah, absolutely. So,
Comment. I have one comment. Tammy, do you have a list, sort of an ongoing list of what's in disrepair that you would prioritize in terms of like safety first and then the nice to have, what you have to have and then nice to have? That's all.
I can provide that as part of that list, if that's what you're looking for. It's kind of sort of in my little, like, a bit of a priority list anyways, just by sight. Don't hold me to that, okay? But Radnor Activity Center, Odoricio, Cowan, I mean, those sit there at the top. And then I think there's, you know, you kind of go on from there where things maybe aren't necessarily in a set order.
Yeah. And my last comment is the funding being, and repairs and upgrades being balanced throughout the township on a regular basis? That makes sense? So sort of everyone's getting their fair share in their particular ward.
We could take a look at that and plot it out, but I think given the borrowing, it was spread pretty far around. When you're looking at like Macron, you know, we looked at Warren Philippone, South Devon, Fenimore Woods, Petrie Park. I think we covered a pretty vast area.
And I'd add that does occur, but not on a per year basis. So for example, I mean, how much did we spend at Macron? And this year is Fenimore coming up in 19, right? So we may not get to Cowan or Odoricio in 19, it might slide into 20. But the plan is, there are assets for the entire township. And I mean, my ward, what do I have for parks? Ithan Valley and
Brook, Bishop Richard Allen Park.
Richard Allen, and then the pocket park that we did.
Petrie.
That we put money in. So, yeah, we do try to, I would say we actually make sure that it gets spread around, just not on an annual basis.
and I'll circulate the list of parks around again, and you and I will get together and talk about that as well. Okay, great. Anything else for the order of the good by anybody? Tammy, anything else you'd like us to discuss this evening? Okay.
You all know that we got the award from Delaware County for Macron Park, right?
Yeah, we discussed that last
Okay.
month, yeah.
Because we did get, it was presented at one of our board meetings. It's a nice little, looks like a glass flame.
Yeah, it's like an acrylic, looks like a crystal.
I
like
thought it was out there,
plaque.
but I
It's
couldn't
actually
find it.
upstairs in the manager's office.
Okay.
When we have our next meeting up there, we can all take a look
Take a
at
look at
it.
it.
I can bring it to the next meeting.
All right. Tammy, thank you for the pumpkins. Do I have a motion to adjourn? All right, we're adjourned.
Second.
Thank you.